Hey, what is up, mortals? It is me, Dylan, here with a new video for you. Welcome to part 17 of My Hero Academia meets Solo Leveling. I just wanted to greet you guys by just saying, sit back and relax. You're in for a treat. So, we begin. Kirishima was terrified, but the word itself couldn't fully encapsulate what he felt. He was frozen in place, covered in sweat, and trembling ever so slightly. What he saw was a masked villain tearing its way through whoever came too close, and he did so with ease. Even the shadow soldiers, who he knew were strong, couldn't do anything against this man. To this man, there were nothing but armored punching bags, and it seemed like they weren't even good punching bags. So to say that Kirishima was terrified wouldn't do what he was feeling any justice. In the middle of all that fear, there was resentment, a frustration of sorts. He couldn't do anything in this situation. He's not strong enough to fight, and not even brave enough to move. That's what frustrated him, and it's also why he resented himself. He hasn't changed at all. He is still that same boy who talked about being strong, but was too scared to even move when it truly mattered. He's not a hero. He's not even a man. He's nothing but a coward, and a pathetic one at that. The villain made quick work of the shadow soldiers, who lay scattered across the room. Now there was nothing between the villain and the students, who all stood frozen in place. Kirishima looked on in more terror as he and the others slowly backed up against the wall. The villain got closer and closer with each step, until he stopped. Kirishima didn't understand what had happened at first, until he looked down and saw that one of the shadow soldiers had grabbed the villain's foot. The soldier was on the ground and didn't actually have the strength to do anything. This was nothing more than an act of desperation, a final attempt to at least delay this man from hurting anyone else. The villain only grinned upon seeing this, as he raised his foot before stomping on the soldier's head. He only did it once, but it was enough to completely destroy his head. Horror filled the students upon witnessing this. But Kirishima felt something more. He couldn't understand what the soldier was thinking. It must have known that it stood no chance. So why did it do that, despite knowing that it would have ended badly? The redhead didn't get to finish these thoughts before the villain started to move again, and the shriek could be heard. He looked to see that it had come from Ashido, and soon realized why. The girl was at the front of the group, and the villain was walking straight to her. This made Kirishima tremble even more, for the villain was going to kill Ashido next. He needed to do something. But what could he do? He wasn't strong enough to fight this man. He'd most likely die after one hit. So what could he do? Kirishima asked himself this question over and over again, but he never got an answer to it. He then started thinking about that shadow soldier and what it did, until it suddenly hit him. The soldier knew that it wasn't strong enough, but it didn't care. It was there to protect them, and it did so to the very end, even if that meant doing something as small as delaying the threat. It knew that it was weak. It knew that it couldn't do anything, but that didn't stop it from being brave and trying. The villain was now dangerously close, and Ashido fell to the floor. Kirishima was brought back to attention, and he finally had enough. He wasn't going to be the same weak and pathetic kid anymore. He refused to be anything like that. Even if it was meaningless, even if it achieved nothing, he was going to be brave and protect his friends no matter the cost. The redhead dashed in front of Ashido, shielding her perfectly. Then he, with all of his blood, sweat, tears, and soul, bravely shouted, "Unbreakable!" Izuku wasted no time at all. He now had Bakugo and was on Kaizo's back. He had already won. It didn't take long for him to return to the meeting place, and he immediately noticed that things were different. Previously, there had only been Shigaraki and Kurogiri there, but now could sense that there were a lot more. The dragon finally landed, which in turn prompted everyone to come out of hiding. What he saw was an odd lineup of different figures, and in the middle of them all was Shigaraki. The greenette dismounted the dragon, landing on the ground with an unconscious Bakugo over his shoulder.
That was quick. I thought we would have to wait a little longer.
May I hear your answer now? Shigaraki then said, making his way to the front of the group. Izuku was calm as always, as he sighed and said, Just like a trusted ally once said, I have your answer right here. Before dropping the unconscious blonde to the ground. The villains all found this rather odd, but Shigaraki soon grinned, for he had gotten exactly what he wanted. The hand-covered villain was about to say something, but was interrupted when a man in black and gray costume said, The kid's unconscious! Does anyone have a marker? We must draw on his face! With a theatrical voice. Izuku chuckled a little after hearing this, as Shigaraki then said, I apologize for Twice. He is quite annoying. With a voice that clearly showed how he didn't like what Twice had just said. Izuku chuckled a little again, as he then said, No worries. I find him to be quite entertaining, actually. To answer your question, no, I don't have a marker on me. But if you don't care about his physical condition, you can go to town with this instead. With what seemed to be a joyous tone, right as he handed Twice a small knife. The villain accepted the knife, right before shouting, So much power! I must carve! With the same theatrical voice as before. This got another chuckle out of Izuku, but Shigaraki seemed to have enough already, as he said, I need him healthy for what I have planned. If that doesn't work, you can carve to your heart's content. Which immediately made Twice disappointed. This exchange was rather odd to some of the other villains, mostly because they didn't know who this kid was. That is when a burn-marked villain decided to speak up. I don't mean to interrupt what is going on here, but who the hell is this guy? Shigaraki quickly regained his senses, as he grinned before saying, You're gonna like him. This is the man I was talking about. Stain's benefactor. With his usual sadistic tone. Izuku quickly went from chuckling to frowning upon hearing this. For Shigaraki had once labeled him incorrectly. There was nothing he could do about it, though, for the villains were already in disbelief. There's no way that his kid is Stain's benefactor, a reptilian-like villain then said, who Izuku recognized as the one he had just taken the arm off. The greenhead was about to say something in response, but didn't get to, as Shigaraki said, Well, you better believe it. This kid right here is the real deal. Now then, we just have to wait for one more before we can head back. With his usual voice. Izuku was a little annoyed again, but he was now confused as well. He was going to ask who they were waiting for, but that question was answered only a few moments later. All right, I have arrived. A voice then called out from the trees. Everyone turned to see that it was a man wearing a coat and a strange mask, and was casually walking to the field. You're late, Compress, Shigaraki exclaimed, sounding a little irritated as he did. Compress bowed upon hearing this, as he then said, I apologize. I ran into a few roadblocks along the way. Before putting one of his hands into his coat pocket. Izuku thought that his gesture was odd, but he didn't get to pry into it before Shigaraki said, All right, now that everyone who's important is here, we can leave. Kurogiri! The mass of mist responded to Shigaraki by creating a massive black portal. One by one the villains made their way through it, where safety waited on the other side. Izuku was about to follow them, until he felt something odd. He didn't know what it was at first, but upon analyzing further, he figured it out and was horrified. Shigaraki noticed how the greenette had stopped, so he turned to ask, What is wrong? With a rather annoyed tone. Izuku didn't respond at first, for he was still processing. Once that was finished, he looked at Shigaraki and said, I have to go. I'll catch up with you later. With a worried tone. Shigaraki was even more confused now, but before he could ask anything, the greenette disappeared into a portal of his own. The hand-covered villain didn't know what to make of this, but he would just have to hope that the greenette would keep his word. This video is sponsored by Honey. Honey is a free browser add-on available on Google, Opera, Firefox, and Safari. If it's a browser, it has Honey. Honey automatically saves you money when you check out on sites like Amazon, Papa John's, and Kohl's. Wherever you shop, it's a good chance that Honey can save you money. All you have to do when you're checking out at these big sites is click that little orange button, and it will scan the entire internet and find discount codes for you. It takes 2 clicks to install Honey. Now anytime you check out, Honey will scan the whole internet and find coupon codes for you. If there's a coupon code, they will find it. And if there's not a coupon code, you can rest assured that you're getting the best price possible. If you install Honey right now, you can save so much money on your online shopping, doing practically nothing. There's no reason not to install Honey. It only takes 2 clicks. 10 million people use it, and has over 100,000 5-star reviews. Unless you hate money, you should install Honey. Use the link in the description to start saving money now. And now back to the video. The students were all frozen in place, but now it was for a different reason. Previously it had been because a villain was inching closer, but now it was from pure horror. In front of them stood Kirishima, taking every single punch from the sadistic villain. He didn't move or fight back. He just stood there and shielded them all. Ashido was the closest to him, so she could see everything in more detail. The redhead was soaked in blood, had almost all of his hardened skin torn off, and almost looked disfigured. She was worried, because she didn't know if he could take it anymore. The villain did not care for Ashido's concern, as he wound his fist back to deliver the final blow. The pink girl wanted to do something, anything to stop that attack, but she couldn't. She was both afraid and powerless, so there was nothing she could do. The fist then flew towards the teen, until it stopped when it was a few centimeters away from collision. Ashido didn't know what was happening, until she turned to see that the fist had been caught. Not only that, it had been caught by none other than Izuku. The green net didn't pay the villain that much attention, as he threw him across the room with ease. The students were all shocked to see this, but that quickly turned into relief when they realized that they were going to be fine. Izuku immediately turned his attention towards Kirishima, looking rather proud as he did, before saying, "You've impressed me, Kirishima. It takes both courage and strength to do what you did, but you can leave the rest to me now." With a proud voice, Ashido smiled upon hearing this, for she felt the same way. They were both waiting for the redhead to respond, but he didn't move. This made Izuku concerned, as he asked, "Kirishima?" The redhead still didn't respond, so Izuku decided to nudge him a little. This, however, didn't give him the results that he wanted, for as soon as he was touched, the redhead dropped. Izuku was quick to catch him before he hit the ground, as he then shouted, "Kirishima!" But he still didn't get a response. Izuku gently led the boy to the ground, hoping to give him a potion for his injuries, but he stopped himself. From Kirishima's chest, he, and only he, could see something strange. It was a piece of darkness, dancing over his chest like a black flame. "What's happening? Why isn't he waking up?" Ashido asked, her voice almost being inaudible from all the worry. Izuku was horrified, unable to process or think straight. He knew what this meant, but he wished that he didn't. He just looked at Ashido, with sorrow and horror in his eyes, as he shook his head. The pink girl didn't believe it at first. She didn't want to believe it, but eventually she had to. She broke down crying. Then she crawled closer to her fallen friend. Izuku had to use all of his strength to stop himself from doing the same, so he clenched his fists and teeth as hard as he could. Every student was now mourning in some way, for the reality had just hit him. Kirishima, the red-haired lion, gave his life to protect them all. The room was filled with sobbing, and Izuku still tried his damnedest to keep it together. That is when they heard footsteps. They all looked to see that it was the villain. He was still there, and didn't seem to show any remorse. He grinned as he looked at Izuku before saying, "Incredible, kid. You're way stronger than you look. Your friend there made for a good punching bag, but you would make a great opponent. Come on, Show me your blood! The students were now even more terrified, for this villain wasn't done yet. They all looked to Izuku, waiting for him to respond in some way, but he didn't. He just stood up silently, before slowly walking towards the villain. The crazed man grinned once again, before throwing a powerful punch. Izuku caught it easily, and he didn't even struggle to keep it back. The villain got frustrated, and threw another punch with his other hand. This one was also caught with ease. The two of them stood still like this. The villain tried to break his hands free while Izuku held him tightly. It lasted for another minute, until Izuku had enough. He squeezed the fist with all of his might, feeling how his opponent's bones began to crack. The villain started to grunt in pain, and desperately tried to break loose. But it was too late. In the next moment, his hand exploded in a bloody and gory blast. The villain screamed in pain as he fell to the floor. Izuku looked at him with cold eyes as he asked, "Did you enjoy it? Did you enjoy murdering my friend?" With a voice that could only be described as being filled with cold hatred, the villain trembled in fear, unable to answer. Izuku's hatred quickly exploded into a burning one as he shouted, "Answer me!" The villain was even more shook by this, but finally responded by saying, "Yes, I did." Izuku was silent after hearing this, but everyone could already tell that he didn't like what he heard. They were just waiting for him to react, but they didn't know how. That answer came rather quickly, as the grenade took a heavy stomp over the villain's knee. The man cried out in pain once more, for his entire leg had been pulverized in an instant. Both of his hands and his leg had been destroyed, meaning that he was completely helpless when Izuku grabbed and lifted him up by the back of his head. "Then I'll make sure to take great pleasure in doing this," the greenette then said, before dragging the men towards one of the walls. The villain begged and pleaded for his life, but Izuku wasn't hearing it. He just walked up to the wall before beginning to smash the villain's face into it. He didn't stop for anything, not for the man's painful shrieks, not for his classmates' horrified cries, not even for the blood and skin that flew into his eyes. Eventually the wall broke, and Izuku stopped. He then lifted the man up to his eye level, seeing that it had already been disfigured, until realizing that he was still alive. That is when he bellowed in rage, before proceeding to smash the villain into the ground instead. The bellows and growls didn't end. Neither did the brutal mutilation. Izuku had lost his mind, soaked in the blood, bone, and matter of a man who pleaded for his life. He had become unrecognizable, completely consumed by grief and rage. After what felt like an eternity, the man's skull finally exploded. The only thing that remained of it was a bloody and gory smear, sitting in a crater that formed underneath all that force. Izuku let go of what was left of the head, before he sat down against the wall. He was breathing heavily, and he was shaking. It was clear that he wasn't alright, but none of the other students dared to even approach him after what they just witnessed. They just watched as he clenched his entire body while being on the verge of breaking down. That is when a trusted friend decided to do what no one else could. "Calm down, my liege," a familiar voice said, making everyone turn to see who it was. It was Igris, crouching down and comforting his master. He had his hand on the greenette's shoulder, and it seemed like it worked. Izuku looked like he had calmed down a little, and his breathing had become more stable. Igris didn't say anything else to his master. He only looked at him and gave him a nod. Izuku seemed to understand what he was getting at, but it seemed like it didn't matter whether he liked it or not. The greenette took a deep breath. Then he stood back up with Igris, standing next to him. He then looked at the remains of the dead villain, and uttered a cold, "Arise." What followed came as a shock to everyone. From the dead pile, a shadow in the form of a human, one that looked identical to the now dead man, rose. Everyone froze after seeing this, for they understood what it meant. Izuku could raise the dead. His shadow soldiers were all undead. This horrible realization brought another question. How many people had he killed already? Everyone pondered this question in horror, except for one. Ashido was horrified like the rest, but she didn't care how many people Izuku had killed. All she cared about was that he could raise the dead. The pink girl looked at the brunette, struggling to bring the words out, until she finally said, "Bring him back," with a trembling voice. Izuku was confused by this, as he asked, "What?" Ashido was still trembling, but they didn't stop her from saying, "Bring Kirishima back," with the same voice as before. Izuku finally understood what she meant, but he wasn't going to listen. "No, I won't do that. He gave everything to save you. The least you can do is show some goddamn gratitude and let him rest." With an irritated voice, Ashido broke down upon hearing this, as she said, "He died too soon. You have to bring him back." With an even more emotional voice. This made Izuku angry, as he shouted, "What kind of argument is that? People die all the time, and each one of them is from a different cause at a different point in their lives. Kirishima died a hero's death at a young age. We should all grieve, honor his name, and be grateful for what he sacrificed. Asking me to raise him would not only discredit that sacrifice, but it's also incredibly selfish." Ashido cried even more after hearing this. She couldn't argue anymore, and therefore she couldn't convince him. The only thing she could do right was plead. "Please, he died protecting me. No, it's selfish, but I just want him back." She cried, hoping it would work. Izuku was conflicted. While he does stand by what he said, he also wants to bring Kirishima back. He doesn't want to let him go. That would be too hard, so right now he wasn't sure of what to do. "May I share my opinion, my liege?" Egerson asked, breaking Izuku out of his thoughts. The brunette sighed lightly, before he nodded to say yes. Egress nodded back, before he said, "I understand how you feel about this, but there are things that you can't ignore. Sir Kirishima made the ultimate sacrifice to protect the people that he cared about. Something like that is rare, even among heroes, and he may be weak, but with enough time and investment, that can change." With a calm voice. This made Izuku think for a while. Egress made a good point. Kirishima could be useful if they made him stronger. The issue, however, is that he doesn't want Kirishima to join his ranks and become a murderer. To prevent that, he would need his own task. After going over it in his head a few times, Izuku walked up to Ashido. The pink girl was holding her dead friend in her arms, as she looked at the approaching brunette. Izuku looked at her with a blank expression, until he said, "Fine, but no one finds out about this. Arise!" In response to this, a shadow rose, and its form completed almost instantly. In front of them stood a shadow that perfectly resembled Kirishima, without any form of injuries. He looked at his hands at first, almost as if to reassure his own existence, before turning towards Ashido. The pink girl stood up shakily, before she ran into the shadow boy's embrace. "As you are right now, you're incredibly weak. I'll make sure that you'll be strong enough to defeat anyone. Then I have only one task for you. That task is to protect Class 1A. Nothing else." Izuku then said, while sounding serious. Kirishima looked at him, before nodding in response. Izuku felt reassured after hearing this, for it meant that things would be fine. This didn't last for long, however, as they heard something approaching from the forest. Izuku turned to see that it was Aizawa and Vladking, which meant that they needed to hide Kirishima. So Kirishima jumped to do Izuku's shadow when no one would see him. "Midoriya, what happened here?" The voice of Aizawa then asked, prompting Izuku to look at him. The tired teacher looked horrified, and with good reason. Izuku was soaked in blood and gore, with the dead bodies of a villain and a student on the floor. The poor teacher was probably assuming all kinds of terrible scenarios, because it looked really bad. "Your orders, my liege?" Egerton asked. waiting for any orders to fight or run away. Izuku, however, didn't know how to get out of the situation. He couldn't teleport for a long while, and he didn't want to fight anyone from UA. The green net was silent for a while, until he did something that no one saw coming. He raised his hands above his head and dropped to his knees before saying, "Stand down, Igris." Igris was shocked by this, but he didn't go against his master. He did as he was told. He stood down. Thank you all for indulging yourselves in all this information thus far. I hope you enjoyed it. Now, there are a few more things that I'd like to go over before the video ends. Firstly, I'd like to thank our patrons: Biddy Flames, Ethan Davis, Terry Chills, Shifter Meals, Adam Zadjul, Sil, XAVBeat03, and Joshua Phelps. Secondly, I'd also like to thank all of our YouTube members: Toy Acosta, Rob the King, Sith Lord 906, CF2364, and Knuckles, Remio Tempest, Angel Juarez, Donald C. Stewart, Brian Greer, and Demonized Fox. Thirdly, if you're in the mood for some great storytelling, We the Celestials have got you covered. Our We the Celestials My Hero Academia and Naruto What If channels retell the story of their namesake anime with a twist. Check it out if you're interested. Fourthly, on behalf of We the Celestials, I'd like to thank everyone involved in today's excellent content production. Their details can be found in the description below. Fifthly, if you're keeping track, if you're interested in what we do here at We the Celestials, I'd like to extend you an invitation to join our team. The only caveat being is that we only accept members from 16 years and up to join our crew. You can sign up for whichever category fulfills your interest by joining the recruitment Discord using the link in the description below. We're always looking for members to join us. Well, that's it from us for today's video. So thank you all for watching, and have a great day.